this summer, I was on a live stream with the president of the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention. That's basically in the SBC as high as you can go. I don't fully understand the SBC, and maybe that's a whole nother kind of mosaic topic. It's culturally, we are not SBC. It's just a whole lot of other kind of drama there. But I'm on this live stream with several other Black pastors around the country and the president of the executive committee. And this is after George Floyd's death. And in typical Charlie Dates fashion, I mean, I'm just kind of like, why are we on here? What's going on? And I ask him, I say, hey, man, say Black Lives Matter. My man couldn't even form his mouth to say Black Lives Matter. And it occurred to me, again, anew and afresh, that it seems to be those with a conservative theological bent, with an evangelical bent, who for whatever reason cannot form their lips or their lives to say Black Lives Matter. So if you, during the time that I was at TEDS, if you were to take a church history course with Dr. John Woodbridge or Dr. Sweeney, or even I studied with Dr. Manich at one point, but was one of his advisees, you would notice that there was a heavy emphasis on the Puritans when it came to American church history. And I brought one of the books, I pulled it off of my shelf today. This is one I remember reading. It's called The Reformed Pastor, and it's by Richard Baxter. I even read a prayer that I wrote in here back in 2003 after reading this book. Long time ago. I was so taken by this guy. I didn't know what Reformed was. I didn't realize that Reformed would later become a kind of political movement within evangelicalism. That's a whole other thing. But I was just taken by the fact that this guy, this pastor, would go and like catechize members within his fellowship, and that he would pay particularly close attention to how people were developing. And I thought that was remarkable. It wasn't until later that I realized this guy was rather sympathetic to slaveholding. Not only him, Ibram Kendi does this for us in Stamped from the Beginning. He draws a line between Richard Baxter and Cotton Mather, a kind of theological line. Cotton Mather becomes the most well-published theological person in Massachusetts during the colonial period. And there are several decades between Richard Baxter and Cotton Mather. But they become the kind of theological architects, the framers, as it were, of American Christianity in a real sense. And what you discover is that Cotton Mather owned slaves. I'm not sure that Richard Baxter did, but Cotton Mather owned slaves. And the problem for Cotton Mather and Richard Baxter is that they felt like the slaves needed to be evangelized. But in order to evangelize the slaves, they had to actually admit that the slaves had souls. Because what are you going to evangelize somebody for if they don't have a soul? And so they had to construe a theological framework that honored the soul component of slaves and yet could commoditize the Black bodies of slaves. And this is very important, I think, even to where we are as I'm watching election results down the way in my study. There has been this bifurcation ever since, from curse theory to climate theory to whatever you want to call it, to justify the greed, I think, of broader American evangelicalism, the racism in broader American evangelicalism that will affirm the spiritual lives of Black and brown people, but will demean Black and brown bodies. So there is something I propose within the way that American evangelicalism has been put together that inherently disrespects Black lives. If we do not deal with it historically, we cannot deal with it contemporarily or practically. And so I think there is theological reason, quite frankly, why some within evangelicalism cannot say Black Lives Matter. But then I also think very practically that there are sociological blind spots within evangelical theology that pushes people toward all lives matter rather than Black Lives Matter.